We've finally done it, ragazzi. The champions of Europe are going to defend their title at Euro 2024. I can't say it was a pleasure watching it, and I'm going to open with that question actually for Mina Rizuki, who's here with me, Nicky Bandini, as ever, for Serie Chronicles. Mina, you were just telling me off air that your neighbour very kindly started drilling at 1 a.m. So I was curious to know whether that was a more or less pleasant experience than watching Italy and their 0-0 draw with Ukraine.
It was a better experience. Waking up to a drilling at 1 a.m. was better than those last 3 minutes in which I aged 10 years. I honestly think like, so here's a question for you guys, because I'm sure, I wonder how many men actually listen to us in comparison to how many women do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But there is a fund that women need to start at the age of maybe 45 or perhaps even younger, to contribute to the way that they'll look like in the future, whether they need Botox and stuff. That fund has really needed to be seriously like injected with a lot going forward. Because in my head, I'm like, I probably just look a little bit older than I did yesterday because of those last 3 minutes. Oh, Nicky, it's been a horrendous week. I mean, I was sick, obviously, which is why I missed that wonderful podcast that you had last week with Patrick Kendrick. Obviously nothing more beautiful than his whole defense of Allegri, but more than that, it was
That's
just this.
why you enjoyed it so much. It was like, oh, it's a great podcast. I love listening to it. And I was like, oh, that's nice. She enjoyed it even though she wasn't on it. Now I know why. It's just because he said nice things about Max Allegri. Oh, okay.
It really was.
There you go.
And there was
thinking of a good job.
But you were also pretty sweet. Like, you didn't push back, you know? And I really liked your points about Pioli. You were sweet about him too. So I was like, like just screaming at it, you know?
We were on time constraints. Patrick had time constraints. So I knew I couldn't, push back too hard or we wouldn't get on anywhere.
Nicky, are you trying to say you would have pushed back?
I think we should have that conversation later, but I think we do need to talk about what happened, because it's been a week, honestly. Since we last checked in with everyone, of course, there's actually been 2 Euro qualifiers. The first of which was this 5-2 win against North Macedonia, which felt to me like this tremendous release. I mean, North Macedonia, who stopped us from going to the World Cup, and then we drew them again away from home in the group, and just this sort of bogey team we've got coming up, and to not just beat them, but to wallop them a bit. I know the second half got a bit more sort of hairy after they got back to 3-2, but it really felt like for a lot of that game, Italy were playing with a sort of, I was going to say almost dismissive swagger that I think they should play with against a team like North Macedonia. And I'm sorry that that's going to sound super disrespectful to a team that's stopped Italy from winning twice. But when Federico Chiesa scores that second goal and he just swaggers off, you're like, yes, it's Italy. You're supposed to be beating teams and acting like this and behaving like we're a good team that can do this with our European champions. And so it felt like there was some of that came back. But then for 90 minutes in Leverkusen against Ukraine, it was just back to, oh no, this is how qualifying campaigns end. Because Mina, 2 World Cup cycles ago, 2 games against Sweden, can't score a sodding goal. Last World Cup cycle, North Macedonia can't score a sodding goal, with a million shots in that game. And this game, look, I've had some neutrals tell me they really enjoyed this game, that it was a fun 0-0. But as an Italian watching it, just can we once score a goal in a game that's do or die? Can we just once do that and make our lives a bit easier? And the answer, in fact, on this occasion was once again no.
No, absolutely. And I genuinely felt that after watching that performance against Macedonia, I completely... Listen, it was weird because I was a bit split watching that. Because firstly, I was like in the slumber. So I was half lucid, half not. Yeah. Then all of a sudden, like Damian gets a goal and it's like and I was thinking... No. First, it was Jorginho missing the penalty. I just remember, all I remember doing really badly is I threw my remote control at the TV. It hit the TV. and the whole thing shut down. Yeah. So then I was like,
oh no.
yeah. So then I was like, which was firstly really annoying because firstly I was really scared that I broke my TV, and
Oh
secondly
god.
I had to get out of bed. Yeah, and I'm like sick. I'm barely
So
like
now we get to
alive
the
at
real
this
crux of
point.
the issue.
Yes. And then I'm just thinking, like, I'm sorry, but on what planet are we more concerned with the psychology of a player than we are with actually qualifying at this point? Because,
Yeah.
Jorginho is such a good guy and we don't want to hurt his feelings. And he is, and I'm sure he's lovely. And everyone keeps saying he has a family. I get it. I'm not trying to tell you the guy is a horrible man. But at this point, I would really not. I just feel like the team needs to come above, And it's 4 in a row. And they're saying if there's another penalty, he'll go for it. And I'm like, no. And that's just, oh my God, no. My friend messaged me saying, well, if it's not Jorginho, who is it? I'm like, Donnarumma at this point is somebody I'd accept, like it's just madness. So I had to get out of bed and then switch the TV back on. And luckily there was a goal straight away. So I didn't have enough time to mourn all of it, But yes, back to that. I mean, Jorginho, I have you're an Arsenal fan and I don't know what you like. We should probably ask you about him. What do you make of his performances?
I've been Jorginho defender number 1 in the past. I remember in the Euros, even in the Euros that we won, him taking some criticism, me defending him. I remember defending him when he's at Chelsea. I think he's a sometimes misunderstood player. I've got penalties on the brain now, but good God, you are right. There's no more penalties for you. I'm sorry. Go do something else. You're not allowed to take penalties anymore. And I don't think for me that he's part of my best midfield 3 for Italy anymore. I understand why Spalletti wants him there. I think Spalletti is looking for his Lobotka, isn't he? He's looking for the player who can organise play and do that for him. And I don't know. I was thinking a lot about Italy's midfield watching these 2 games because I thought that together with Chiesa, who we definitely have to talk about, I thought that Barella was probably the next best player in that game against Ukraine. I thought he was really excellent, although Di Marco was also brilliant. And I think that when I conceive the future Italy in my head, that makes me excited, that makes me think, yes, okay, we can get back to being a really special team again. It's built on this idea that actually we have got a genuinely, at least with the potential to be a world-class forward winger in Federico Chiesa. And I think we have the potential to eventually have a world-class midfield because Barella is in that category for me. And Tonali, who of course we're not going to see for a while, is in that category for me. And perhaps the alternate options of Locatelli and Cristante are really high-class options to me. So I think there is this sort of nucleus that I'm excited about, and Jorginho is not part of it. Now, having said that, Cristante is still sometimes prone to these decisions that frustrate me, such as wafting a leg at Mudryk in the area in the 93rd minute. And Locatelli, I still sometimes think, are you really at a Gista or a Mezzala? And that sort of dynamic is interesting. So I don't know that I actually have the perfect composition of the midfield in my head. And I do see why Jorginho gives you something different. But I don't have faith in him to the level that I would like to for someone doing that job.
Yeah, it's his performance against Macedonia was a lot better than obviously this performance against Ukraine, even with the missed penalty. I look at the midfield and I think that it's such a shame that there's no Tonali because I just feel how much he would have elevated it. What about Fratesi? Because yesterday, I mean, Fratesi is a player that's really like ever since he's gone to Inter, I feel like he's even taken a step further. Like he's the guy. Like he's been excellent to watch for Italy. Yesterday he had that brilliant chance.
He started like 1 game for Inter. Like he's almost always been off the bench for them in Serie.
And yet, even when he's at Inter and they're like about to introduce him, into their games, I'm always like, oh, Fratesi is coming on. Like it's going to be something special. Like he has that power to make you think that it's going to be something special. You know what was really annoying? Sorry, just going back to Jorginho, with the people who were defending why he wasn't scoring these goals. And, somebody said, oh, well, it's a lottery. Like, oh, his agent. I mean, it's a lottery, right? Like you can't, I mean, more and more as football progresses. as football
Read
progresses, it's going to
Soccernomics
be
or whatever.
harder and harder to score goals. And I'm like, maybe you should tell that to Çalhanoğlu, who hasn't missed a penalty, you know, like, as in, come on, like, you can't defend that way. You could just stop skipping. You know, we're not on the playfield, like, just playground, like, do just stop skipping. Anyway, never mind. But point is, well, maybe he could just have a chat with Çalhanoğlu and figure out how on earth that guy always scores his penalties. But Tonali, Locatelli, Fratesi, Barella, who is just the midfielder of all midfielders. How many of them? Like, I would have liked a sort of a Fagioli, but like somebody who's a little bit more experienced than a Fagioli, but that kind of style of play, you know, would have been really useful as well. But it is what it is, and I don't know. I don't look at this midfield and think I feel safe. I'll be honest with you, I don't. But I actually have a lot more optimism when it comes to the back line.
I think what gives me a lot of optimism right now, Mina, and this was definitely a thing I wanted to get onto with you, is there's actually lots of positions now quite interesting depth, which there hasn't always been as well. And I think what was really sort of fascinating between these two games was, to some extent, watching Spalletti do horses for courses, right? Picking a different team that was, you know, slightly different team for the two games. And of course, some pieces are unmovable, right? You want Federico Chiesa in that team, you want Barella in that team. Some things are not going to change, but players like Bonaventura and Berardi, I think Bonaventura, who I love to bits and who has been playing absolutely fantastically this season, I don't think any of us believe he should be in the starting 11 for your games against the very best teams. But what you can do when you've got two games close together is say, yes, he's going to do an excellent job for you against North Macedonia. And he did. He was great in that game. And likewise, you've got options up front now, and you've got the option to start Berardi against North Macedonia. And with him, I think it's a different conversation, because I do think he's at least capable of playing against anyone. We've seen it in Serie A. He scored some brilliant goals in Sassuolo's biggest games this season. But perhaps taking Zaniolo into that Ukraine game, where you're saying, well, I want someone a bit more physical. I want someone who can lean into that part of the game, who's going to get into a battle and get stuck in. And actually, Zaniolo, I thought, had quite a good game against Ukraine as well. So I think it's really sort of exciting seeing some of that depth at certain positions. And look, we need to keep coming back to, when it comes to team selection and where the national team is. Spalletti was brought in August. He had a qualifying campaign that was already compromised, and he was sort of putting it in the middle of it and said, you know, do something with this. And so when he said at the end of the game against Ukraine, the fun starts here, basically, I believe him. And I think North Macedonia was him having the fun. It was him saying, this is what this team's capable of. We can play attacking football. We can be open. And maybe it was too open, but we want to play like this eventually. And Ukraine was trying to be a bit more responsible. Although, look, they did still create good chances in this game. Fratesi, Chiesa in the first half. If one of them could just keep their head and stick the ball in the net, then this would have been a far more serene game. But I don't know why it is, Mina. For some reason, in these do or die games at the moment, we haven't been able to do it.
2 shots on target in the first half, 2 shots on target throughout, because we didn't add anything in the second half. I mean, just to lay it out, let's just. So there was a game against Macedonia. You know, it was a thrilling performance from in every way, because attitude matters. And I think that's what's always been the defining aspect of Italy, is that they don't always necessarily play the greatest of games going back historically, or give the best of performances, but they've always been intelligent, mature, and always shown the best of themselves and when it matters. And we've seen that throughout their history. The thing that has always brought us back is that we've always been a team where our average age is 28 and plus. And I think that is added to the fact that we play these games with a level of maturity or cunning behavior or whatever it is that other stereotypes have been added to it. But I've always liked it in the sense that I feel safe. I feel safe that if we are 2-0 up, that we can probably win that game. I don't necessarily have that feeling. I don't blame that on Spalletti, because I think there are just so many mitigating circumstances right now. We don't have a full team. People keep going in and out, whether it's, you know, Tonali and Fagioli out or whatever it is. But I don't I don't like watching teams where there is a possibility that North Macedonia can get 2 goals. That is one thing where we don't have control of the midfield like we showed yesterday against Ukraine in the beginning, where it just seemed to be so much chaos. And in chaos, you'll always have people that shine. I mean, Chiesa will always shine when he's able to tear through, because that's what he does so well. And I think that's what Zaniolo does so well. There will be matches, and I agree with you, courses, horses for courses. There's going to be games in which I think Berardi's individual quality to just sometimes score one of the most beautiful goals will be important, because I think he's really capable of that. But essentially, I worry of our inability to really see games out, our inability to rise above the pressure. I mean, we could say, oh, we did it against North Macedonia. I understand that North Macedonia now look like they are Germany, but it's still North Macedonia. Like, it shouldn't have, like, it's still not, like, we should be able to do that. Ukraine is a higher level than North Macedonia. And it worries me how easy it was for them to counterattack in the first half, when it's like the first thing we talked about in the press conference is we have to be careful on the transitions. And we were not careful in the transitions. And I do want to maybe give people like Colpani a chance. I'd like Calafiori to be given a chance at the back. I'd like sort of different, and I'm sure Spalletti, he doesn't have time, right? Because he's had so little time to prepare this. And I don't know how many people we're going to call up to arrange this. But
there were some players that I think, one of the players I wanted to talk about, and get your opinion on. I mean, obviously Federico Gatti, we've been watching Juventus this season, has been playing well, but actually sort of the perhaps bolder inclusion is for that second game against Ukraine, starting Alessandro Buongiorno at centre back and someone who's played a total of one game for Italy before. And he picked up a booking really early, and I was thinking, oh God, this is a disaster. You've got a 24-year-old playing his second game for Italy, he's got a booking already. And actually, I thought he played a pretty good game after that, and he's playing for a Torino team that have produced some very good defenders recently. Obviously, Bremer snapped up by Juventus, and I feel more optimistic about the talent level than I have in a while, personally. I think, of course, it's not Chiellini and Bonucci. This was a conversation that was sort of, I was asked about this on the BBC World Service yesterday, and they were talking about how has it got to this point where Italy have failed to qualify for 2 of the last 3 major tournaments, and they might miss out on this one. And I was sort of talking about this sort of part of that is linked to individual stories, right? I think that even though there's a big picture of disappointing results, you still have to look at the Ventura era as the Ventura era, because you had a manager who was sort of historically unpopular, who had players openly questioning his decision in the middle of games, De Rossi refusing to come on, things like that. It's its own story to some extent. But without question, there's an overarching narrative, which is talent has been missing in lots of parts of the pitch. When you look at England, I'm only saying England because we both currently live in England, and you've got Jude Bellingham and you've got Phil Foden and you've got this sort of depth of young talent. Italy doesn't have that right now. So that's a gap that's been there. But I think looking at this squad, looking at players like Buongiorno getting their chances, looking at the midfield we've already talked about, looking at Di Marco, who's come on so many leaps and bounds in the last few years at Inter, I honestly feel more optimistic about the talent there than I have in years. I mean, do you agree with me, Mina, or do you think I'm just way off base on that?
No, I think that it helps that Inter has become a force in Europe. I think it helps that Di Marco was fascinating to watch before, but going to Inter and then navigating his way through really tricky matches, and as a player who has got a very strong attitude, he's a very typical Italian player. He's probably one of the few that I can honestly say that he's a leader straight away, and I think that he's a throwback to, like, the yesteryears of like De Rossi and that kind of player. But having the ability to, I mean, he used to make mistakes. People were not sure about Di Marco, right? There was lots of question marks about his defending. There was, but playing Champions League finals, playing with this attitude at Inter right now, where they are just so undefeated, they feel strong, has elevated him. It's elevated Barella, it's elevated Bastoni, and I think that it is that level of competition. Whereas almost Juventus potentially are holding back Chiesa. I mean, I don't know. I honestly don't know. This is the other question, because there he is playing as a winger by far. I mean, Gazzetta called him by far the best player yesterday.
Mm.
Tuttosport was up in arms with how brilliant he was. He clearly is a very, very special winger. And yet, I don't know how much he has actually developed in this role. So I don't know whether, it would be important to sort of seeing him back with Juventus need to be back to navigate the very higher echelons of football, taking on like semi-finals and that, because it helps with the performance of these players. And I think there's just not enough. Like, I think Buongiorno is excellent. It is Ukraine. How is he going to do if it's their better attackers?
But
I
you
was
just alluded
very
to
impressed with
Bastoni,
how
who would be there if he was fit, and that's also part of the picture for these
Scalvini.
games. There were some absences for these games as well.
Yeah, but I do worry, and I think that defensively, I think there's a lot of names. Like, honestly, I think there are a lot of names. I'm telling you that I want Calafiori. He's playing for the Azzurrini, but I think that he is a really special player. I really, really like him. Like, I'd love him to join Juventus, in all honesty. But in general, like, there are a lot of defenders, so it makes me feel better because I only care about defense. But in terms of I would like sort of midfielders. I'm unsure about how the attack is going to go. Is it Scamacca? Is it Immobile? Who is, is it Raspadori? There are so many question marks. How are we going to play? Are we trying? It's very front-footed that it makes me very nervous defensively. Here's the thing, like, we were 1-0 up against England. If this was Antonio Conte, would have buried down the hatches and just defended for the rest of the time and probably walked away with the win, right? But we were so attacking and we were testing it out. And if we had gotten that win in against England, that we wouldn't have needed to worry about this game, So I keep thinking about that, and I don't know what the right strategy is for Italy. I do want us to be more attacking, but it makes me very nervous because of how open we are in midfield. It's not the defenders that I don't think are good enough. I just think the midfield is not capable enough of taking the team by the scruff of the neck.
For me, the attack is the big thing. The attack is, and that's always like an interesting question. Like, you've just sort of put into my head. It's like, does it make any sense to play in such an attacking way if you haven't got the attackers to take the chances? Because actually, even as you were talking, I was just sort of checking quickly the numbers from that England-Italy game, and Italy had way more shots than England in that game. But if you're not ruthless with your chances, then does it matter? And to answer your question from what I think the answer is so far, I think that Raspadori is the first option now at centre forward. I think that Spalletti's connection with him is going to make that the case. I think the fact that we've done so many rounds now with Immobile and Belotti means it's got to be the new faces. And to me, the point in that game against Ukraine when Italy looked least convincing was unfortunately after Scamacca came on. And I think he has a role, Scamacca. I think he's going to be your plan B because he's got the physicality, because he's got the size. But when we're talking about quality we see all over the pitch, and we're talking about things we're excited about in defence, in midfield, I struggle up front. I like Raspadori. I think he's a good footballer, but I don't think he's necessarily the player who I would want to be my first choice number 9. I just don't see a better option. And I think he fits the style of football that Spalletti wants to play, so I think he'll be the option. But that certainly leads to questions about, should you be playing so front-footed if you're not going to be ruthless and take the chances when you get them, if you're not going to be as sharp in the final third? But some of these, again, I think the football being played now is not the football that's going to be played next summer, because you will have had several more chances to train together to try and install, even though national team managers never have as much time as they want, you'll have had more time to try to install like systems that are yours, that you feel like the players understand and that they're going to benefit from and make the most of. Whereas, without wanting to be a sort of broken clock on this one, this is a very, very limited window from August to November that Spalletti has had to make this team his own.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I go back to this. They're not the most efficient of attackers. So if they're not, then can we play the way that we're playing right now? So that is, I think, the main question mark. And this is why it worries me that I do think it's a bit kamikaze, in the sense that, let's go forward. Let's try to get lots of shots on goal, which we did against England. It was brilliant to watch. I had a lot of faith in us after watching us in England, to be honest, even especially in the first half. Then it became a disaster defensively. But it is that there are going to be really a lot of shots, but not necessarily a lot of goals scored. And that's what worries me. Like when you see the level of goals scored, it's not. And this is what I like about Spalletti. He's interested in having friendlies that will be against tougher opposition. And I think it will answer a lot of his questions that he has about the squad. He wants to arrange friendlies against France, against Germany, to ensure that we can actually test it out against the bigger teams and see how Italy performs. I don't think that this is an Italian side that has the mentality of rising above anything or calm enough to sort of suppress any pressure. You saw that because it was a lot of suffering at the end, and I'm glad that we managed to close it out. But I think we should talk about the penalty.
We've been talking for 25 minutes and we haven't even talked about it.
Mention that.
So fixated,
but should they have even qualified at this point? For me, it's a clear penalty. It's absolutely a penalty.
I mean, as we've established firmly from watching Jorginho, penalties can be missed. So them getting a penalty would not have guaranteed that they scored it.
Sure.
Actually sort of small subplot to the game and perhaps the story of everything else. I actually thought Donnarumma was, for 95% of this game, very good. He made a couple of very good saves. There was one moment when he got lost on a throw-in late in the game, which caused me absolute palpitations. But he recovered from it and made a great save at the back post to make up for it. I think with Donnarumma, that stuff still worries me, like his uscite, like how he comes out. That's the part of his game that bothers me the most. But he had a good game when he needed to, and I think especially with all the Vicario chat, that's good to see. To finally talk about it, to me, it was a penalty. I think Cristante, again, I'm going to stick with these percentages. I think I like 95% of Cristante's game, but sometimes I think he makes fouls that he just doesn't need to. And I think that he left his foot out there when he didn't have to. I think Mudryk is looking for it. It's the 93rd minute of a game that Ukraine have to win. Of course, Mudryk is looking for that opportunity. I think he sees that opportunity and he takes it. But I still think that Cristante sweeps his leg. There's clearly no contact with the ball. And for me, that's a penalty. What I would say is that once the referee hasn't given the penalty, I do understand and perhaps think that this is something that is too often done wrong with VAR. We wanted VAR to give us clear and obvious errors. And the fact that there's a discussion around this penalty means that probably it's not clear and obvious. So I think it would have been fair for VAR to not intervene if it was given as a penalty, and fair for VAR to not intervene if it's not given as a penalty. And in this case, the referee on the pitch did not give it. But looking at it myself, I think it's a penalty.
To me, it's a clear penalty. I'm going to be really honest. If this happened and it was Chiesa who fell, I would have lost my mind. So if it's Italy that didn't qualify based on that, I would have lost my mind. So maybe because I'm looking at it in their shoes, and I thought that the coach spoke so well in this. He says, Rebrov spoke so well about it, and he said, I thought it was a penalty, but clearly VAR didn't, and he just left it at that. In fact, Ukraine's behavior throughout, it was wonderful, to be honest with you. I just thought it was such a nice game in the sense that there was a genuine respect between these two sides, and we hope that we can see Ukraine in the Euros and succeed in the playoffs, obviously. But Mudryk was very good. I mean, he caused a lot of problems. One thing that I agree with you, is that he does have that to his game. There's a lot of sort of falling around a lot. And as noted by a lot of the papers, it sort of ends up playing with the referee's mind, because now he just sees him as a diver, and that is, it conditions you to how you're then proceeding forward. I don't care. There's a lot of players who are divers, and I'll be honest with you, Mauro Camoranesi was brilliant at it. Del Piero was brilliant at it. Like, as in,
Uh-huh.
sometimes you fall, and I just remember
Harry
like
Kane's
Conte totally.
Harry Kane's one of the worst divers out there, and he's also one of the best strikers in the world. Two things can be true.
Two things can be true. It doesn't.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, I kind of want them to sometimes fall. Do you know what I mean? I don't
Yeah.
mind this cutting edge. Like, as in. Thierry Henry is going to do what he's going to do to make sure France get qualified, and I don't necessarily like love the way that some of it is done, but I'm just interested in getting my country across, so I understand the desire to do that for your country. So
Yeah.
Cristante, yes, I'm sorry, it was careless, it was reckless. You can look at it. The one thing that I think, is that Mudryk falls too quickly. It's almost like he saw it coming, and it did come, but you anticipated it too quickly, and the fall was so exaggerated that it somewhat has changed the mind of the referee, who already thinks of you as being a specific way or a specific type of play, and that's probably the only thing. But facts are facts, and at the end of the day, there is contact, and whether or not people are like, yeah, but contact doesn't mean anything, it does mean something. So I think that either way, when you think about Ceferin coming out and saying stuff like, it would be a disaster if Italy don't qualify, we are the biggest conspiracy theorists in Europe, like, I mean, hands down, if someone had gone in and the president of UEFA had said it would be a disaster if Ukraine don't qualify, and then Chiesa gets fouled and that doesn't go through, you better believe that I'm going to be like, what's going on at the top of UEFA? Like, is this because of Agnelli and your relationship? I would have gone everywhere with this, because I am a conspiracy theorist, and most of Italy is. And I do appreciate that a lot of people on TV had spoken about the fact that if it was us, we would have been really upset. But I can also understand, and I completely agree with you, why VAR didn't see it as necessarily having to interject, because it is a clear and obvious error. So that I understand.
I actually think you made a really great point there, Mina, that perhaps didn't get talked about. And I said right at the beginning about some friends who are neutral saying it was a great game to watch, and I'm like, not for us. But what I did think, actually, compared to so many games I've seen in these sorts of circumstances where it is such high stakes, and you just touched on it, it was not a game of gamesmanship. It was not a game of like horrendous time wasting. It was not a game of all of that sort of stuff you might expect to see in that circumstance. It felt like an honest game of football, and
yes.
Yeah, it felt like that. And I think sort of building on that, I think I also want to say also, of course, Italy should have qualified more easily than they did. Italy made life harder for themselves all sorts of ways through this qualifying campaign. But Ukraine are a good team and belong at the Euros as well, I think. And I think that to expect Italy to sort of go there and blow them away like they did North Macedonia at home is perhaps was always a bit fanciful. And I think Ukraine, well, I mean, they already drew with England in this group as well, that they're a team that they would not go to the Euros as favourites, but if they went to the Euros would be a tough game for most teams.
Yeah. So going forward now, we are in pot 3, or between pot 3 and pot 4. We have to see what happens in the playoffs.
I was going to say, doesn't it depend on the playoffs? Yeah.
Yeah, where we end up, and in particular, I think Croatia. As it stands, and looking at what is around us, do you think there's enough time for Italy to pull a rabbit out of the hat and produce a team that is cohesive? I mean, there's going to be friendly setup. Luckily, we don't have to worry about the playoffs, so we can start to arrange things, Yeah. And finally, we're not like, shaking in March and trying to figure out whether or not, like, anyway. I mean, frankly speaking, if it would have been crazy, like 2 World Cups and a Euro. I mean, what's going on with Italy, right? Yeah. Like, and there's enough talent. Come on, enough talent to. Anyway, I'm not going to go on about this, but point is that, do you think we have enough going forward to cause serious damage in this in the actual Euros?
Yeah. So, like, just to pick on sort of one bit of this, like, I think it's hard to say this when it's your country involved, and like, so maybe I need to wait another cycle for it's someone else's country involved. I think I sort of still feel like it was a wrong decision to say that the holders don't get automatic qualification. I just think that a tournament missing its holders is wrong. Like it should have the holders in it. And I'm sort of, relieved that Italy aren't the ones who messed that up and didn't qualify anyway. And I don't want that to sort of deflect from Italy's responsibility to qualify. But I don't know. I think the final tournament would be missing something if the holders weren't there to defend what they've got. But do I think that Italy can get back to defending it? It's a tall order, but I do think again that there's lots of talent there that I find interesting. I think that it's very, very convenient, very convenient that the Italian authorities decided to give Tonali a ban that was perhaps not quite long enough to keep him out of the Euros. Actually, am I right on that? Maybe I'm wrong.
No. He is out of the Euros.
He is out of the Euros, isn't he? It's
until August, the ban. So it's 10 months,
I've got that wrong. So we'll just cut that out. We don't need that to be in there.
I don't want to cut it out. I think it's
or just leave me in there saying, so we'll just cut that out. But why have I got that in my head? I don't know why I've got that in my head.
It's Fagioli that's back.
Yeah, I think I've mixed up in my head. So I was saying that with Fagioli and Tonali, haven't I? Fagioli would be back in theory in time for the Euros
because he's allowed to play the last game for Juventus.
Yeah. In any case, do I think that Spalletti can bring together a better team than he's got now? Yes. I love Spalletti. I think he's a brilliant manager. I think he's earned this opportunity with the national team. I think even before he won the league with Napoli, he's one of the managers who I would have liked to see get the chance at some point in his career. And I think winning the league with Napoli buys you some extra credit. And I hope that even if it's not a remarkable Euros now, even if Italy don't win the Euros, I hope that Spalletti will get a World Cup cycle as well, because I would love to see what he can do over time with a group of players that I think has, as I've sort of said in this episode, a fair bit of potential. I wish that we could magic up a centre forward from somewhere. I really do. I wish Italy had a number 9 that I could feel excited about. I want Christian Vieri back because he was the one when I was a kid who I was like, oh, Christian Vieri, he's the boss.
He was the best. The absolute best.
Obviously there were so many other great strikers Italy had, and number 10s, whether it's a number 10 like Baggio or Del Piero, whether it's Totti, whoever it was. There've been so many great forwards, but for me Vieri was always the one I was like, I just believe that guy's going to score. He's going to score. Look at him up there, sort of being physical and dominating the spaces, and we don't have that. We just don't. So there's problems in the team. There's things it's lacking. But I think that Italy will be very competitive at the Euros with Spalletti in charge, personally.
Do you really?
Yeah, I do.
Well, I guess based on
competitive does not mean I think they'll be the best team there. I think England and France are the two best teams going into the Euros, and I think that won't change. I think Spain are a step ahead of Italy for sure, no questions. But I think behind that, I'm not sure that there's a huge number of teams who I see on a different level.
Oh, I mean, Portugal look vicious.
Italy beat Belgium. Portugal, you're right, are coming up very fast, so Portugal will be very competitive as well. I mean,
if Lukaku's scoring 4 goals, then I'm not sure. But the only thing that makes me believe in Belgium this time around is that they actually have an Italian in charge, and you know how I feel about Italian coaching. So, and I love Tedesco. I'm such a big fan of Tedesco. I feel like he did really well, then got shafted a bit, and now he's getting a chance to sort of show us what he can do. But yeah, you're right. In general, though, here's the thing. I think Spalletti's too enlightened of a man to be the right coach for Italy. So I'm having all these question marks about him. To me, he's a coach for Real Madrid. Like I want Ancelotti to go. I want Luciano Spalletti to take over Real Madrid because I just feel like he'd have so much fun, and I just feel like he'll get all the trophies he deserves. And then I think we need to get Italy to either have like a Conte or maybe take Allegri so that Juventus can get somebody who actually does attack for them, and then we can do a nice little reshuffle around. That's my dream, is to have, I don't know, someone like Allegri in charge of Italy, get them to just play 1-0, counter-attack, galore, be like that really incessantly difficult team to beat, and it just makes me feel safe, and I don't have to worry on the 93rd minute when Cristante makes a move like that, and then and that makes me feel good about it. But I'm excited to
Yeah.
see what we can do. I actually feel all right with our attack. I think there's
Uh-huh.
enough there that should get us goals. I think we'll miss a lot of chances, but under Spalletti, we'll create many more. So I
Mhm.
feel the only thing that I want is greater balance. I want to be able so
Mhm.
that if we do lose the ball, we're not opening ourselves up to the transition. And I think that he has enough time to work on that. So I'm confident of that. But yes, it would obviously be a lot better if we actually had a great number 9. And right now we just don't have that. So.
Yeah, so definitely some Italian coaches headed to the Euros along with Spalletti, Vincenzo Montella with Turkey. We've got
It's been
Francesco
fabulous, by
Calzona.
the way.
Yeah, yeah, true. Don't sleep on them either. Francesco Calzona, the Slovakia manager, Rossi at Hungary. So definitely some Italian representation on the benches as always. Mina, I think we should have at least a quick chat about the weekend coming up in Serie A. We've had a good chat about the international round. It is
Mhm.
the Derby d'Italia this weekend, so you were pining for Allegri ball. You're going to get it. Juventus at
Viva
home
Las
to
Vegas.
Inter.
I don't know why I
Is
sang
it
that,
Las
but it just
Vegas?
seemed
Is it
like the
Las
right.
Vegas or is it? What's the opposite of Las Vegas? It's the no gambling zone. It's a state where gambling has been made illegal, and so we just sit quietly in a room with plain white walls and have a sensible conversation. That's
Viva
the world
Guantanamo
that
Bay.
that's the football world Mina wants to live in. I joke. Mina, for serious though, Federico Chiesa comes back in such with such good vibes from these 2 games.
Mhm.
Are Juventus going to upset Inter and go top of Serie A?
I mean, Inter did lose to Juventus twice last year, so there's always that
Mhm.
possibility. And Inter were, I mean, actually, no, Inter is a better team this year, I think, than they were last year, and or at least their performances have been so far this season better than they were at this point last season. Barella is in extraordinary form at the moment. Çalhanoğlu is
Mhm.
in extraordinary form at the moment. Lautaro Martinez is the best striker right now in Serie A. And I think Marcus Thuram has just been a dream come true. And I actually really enjoyed Didier Deschamps talking about him in the sense that how much the tactics serve his particular style of play and how he's really
Mhm.
enjoying himself right now. And we can see the beauty of what he can do. This should really be a 3-0 to Inter. There is all, but what Juventus is a wild card. It's a joker. You don't really know what's going to happen. We talk about a great defense, but actually Inter's conceded less. So I think both of them have a lot of vulnerabilities at the back, but they've done a good job so far. So I definitely think that goals can be scored. Chiesa is allowed to thrive under Spalletti. Locatelli is allowed to thrive under Spalletti. At Juventus, it's just a different style of play. And obviously they have
Mhm.
to adjust to that. And so the people that thrive under Allegri are usually tactical minds, whether it's like a Khedira or Marchisio, like those type of players, I think tend to thrive a lot more. But if you are a wild card or somebody who is purely technical, it can be a little bit problematic. And I don't know whether Chiesa is allowed to do what he knows how to do best. I think he's been brilliant, though, when he has played for Juve. I think he will be brilliant again against Inter. It's just about how many times are we going to give the ball to him? I think that's the only question that we have. Because
Mhm.
Vlahovic is not really that brilliant. So Kostic, it's the midfield, right? There's just not enough midfielders. We also need to talk about the fact that there are many injuries coming into this match.
Mhm.
Is
Yeah,
Locatelli going to be available? Who are the players that are going to be available? Bastoni's not going to be available. So there are question marks as to how many players will actually. I think Juventus is really going to struggle to have a midfield because McKennie's out as well.
I think
So there are.
it's not just injuries, Mina, as well. Like the other thing to say is there's who's coming in later from international duty. For instance, Lautaro, I think, is only going to get back on Thursday after playing Brazil Argentina. So there's a lot of sort of wild cards going into this game, I think, for sure.
And then there's Champions League for them to consider, whereas Juventus don't need to worry about that. you know. Oh, actually, neither do Inter. Sorry, because they've already qualified, so it doesn't matter what happens in the Champions League. Frankly
Well, they still
speaking,
want to win
so
that
they
group.
are.
They still want to win that group, I think.
Uh,
But yes, it's certainly less impactful.
They could win that group if they just defeat Sociedad, which is the last match. So they don't need to take this next one that seriously, I guess. I don't know actually if they do or not. Depends on what Sociedad do. But either way, it doesn't really matter. It's just Juventus are a wild card, and then you. Well, how do you see it going? Do you think it's Inter all the way?
No,
Right?
I think Inter are the better team, but I think that I absolutely can imagine a world where at home Juventus do their
business.
Come up with the right approach, play a tight game, and either get a draw or a tight win. I think Allegri is going to come prepared for this one. Honestly, I think Allegri knows that in a season, the path to winning the league is narrower for Juventus than it is for Inter. I think Juventus have got ultimately less quality, and so they need to just be consistent. And I think that he won't view this as a game they have to win, but I think he'll see it as an opportunity to really make a statement by not losing to this Inter team. And I think that it's not therefore likely to be a particularly thrilling game. I'm already in mind of Roma's game against Inter, which in the end didn't work out for Roma, but Juventus are a better team than Roma. So if they can keep the game tight and give themselves an opportunity even in the later stages, or really at any stage of the game, give themselves an opportunity for Federico Chiesa or Dusan Vlahovic to make something happen, I can see a path to winning for them. But certainly you're right that Locatelli missing would be a big absence. I have that thing in my head now about Lautaro and him being only back for a short time, being tired. If you get into below full sharpness, it's a real opportunity. And yeah, I think do you know what? I'm gonna stick my neck out. I think this is going to be a 1-0 Juventus. I think it's going to be a 1-0 Juventus, and I think they're not necessarily going to deserve it, or at least they're not going to be the team that obviously plays the better football. But I think they're going to come away with 3 points, and it's going to make the top of Serie A even more interesting.
The things that I've seen them is that they tend to really struggle against technical players, defenders defensively. I mean, Chiesa could cause a few problems also with his pace. I honestly don't know, but I agree with you in the sense that Allegri has definitely put this on his calendar, circled it 15,000 times. He is obsessed with defeating Inter. I think it's the team that he needs to prove himself the most against. And we go back to the comments that he made last year at the time when he said, "You'll finish in fourth anyway." Do you remember that? When he was very angry after the game of the Coppa Italia, I think it was. So I know that he wants to. For him, this is his year of trying to get his own back, and it's going to be the year where he has already started to show us that. So this is going to be a game in which he is going to get them really fired up to try to do something. I just don't think he has enough bodies to get that. That's where I worry. But it is one game a week, so it doesn't really matter if they don't have the depth. They're going to just. I think quality is so. There's just no quality. I have no idea how this midfield's going to work, but let's see.
Maybe I'm just too swept up in how great I think that Chiesa was over these last 2 games. Anyway, we will be back next week to talk about that for certain. A couple of other interesting games this weekend. It's an interesting weekend all around. We've got Milan playing Fiorentina on Saturday night. That one jumps out. Atalanta against Napoli just before that. So lots to look forward to, lots to talk about when we come back next week. Mina, should we do some quick Chronicles Tifosi shout-outs for our new subscribers? I'll start the list. We've got Nick, and Jeffrey Lombard, both joining the Chronicles Tifosi.
We've got Leo Haider, who has done some work for us, so welcome, and Milad. So welcome, and hope you enjoy being Chronicles Tifosi members. I think that's pretty much all we have time for. We'll be back next week to obviously review the Derby d'Italia, as well as Mazzari's first game for Napoli. It's going to be very exciting, so please do tune in. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. All links are in the show notes. Thank you to Nicky Bandini. Thank you to producer Simon. Tune in for next week. Ciao for now.
Serie Chronicles is a Chronicles production.